I am Jolene, 32 years old, and the morning my father's funeral ended, I sent a message to our family group chat. Dad's service is over. I'm exhausted. Can someone come stay with me tonight? My older brother typed back within 30 seconds. We have the kids. You'll be fine. My sister-in-law added a single thumbs-up emoji. My aunt wrote, sending prayers. I stared at my phone in the parking lot of Greenfield Memorial Chapel, still wearing the black dress I had borrowed from my coworker because I didn't own one. I typed back, no worries. Then I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I can make myself drive. What none of them knew was that I had been my father's sole caregiver for the last 4 years. What none of them knew was that the night they sent their prayers and their thumbs-up emojis, I would come home to a house that wasn't mine anymore. Before I get into all of that, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the one who showed up? The one who stayed? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever carried something alone that was supposed to be shared, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. I need to go back a little because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My father, Richard, was 68 when he was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's. I was 28. My brother, who is 6 years older than me, had just moved his family to Phoenix for a promotion. My younger sister had her hands full with twin toddlers in Nashville, so when the neurologist sat us down and started talking about in-home care and medication schedules and the eventual need for assisted living, every set of eyes in that room drifted toward me. I was the youngest. I was single. I worked from home as a freelance medical transcriptionist, which meant, in my family's logic, that I was available. Not that I had agreed to anything, not that anyone had asked, but the assumption settled over me like a coat someone drapes on your shoulders without warning, and I wore it because taking it off would have meant being the kind of person I didn't want to be. I moved in with my dad 6 months after the diagnosis. His house was a 3-bedroom ranch in Clover Hill, Tennessee, the town where I grew up, where the hardware store on Main Street still had the same hand-painted sign it had when I was in elementary school. I sublet my apartment in Knoxville. I forwarded my mail. I told myself it was temporary. My dad and I had always been close in a quiet way. He wasn't a man of a lot of words, but he showed up. Every school play, every Saturday soccer game, every time I called him scared at 2 a.m. during my first year living alone, he answered. He was the kind of father who fixed things, leaky faucets, bad moods, the broken taillight on my car that I kept meaning to get looked at. When my mother left when I was 14, it was just the two of us for a long time, and we learned how to be a team. My brother and sister visited twice a year, Christmas and one summer trip. They brought their families, stayed for 4 or 5 days, made noise and mess and memories, and then they left. And I was the one who stayed after the guests were gone and life went back to what it actually was. Medication at 7 and noon and 5. Physical therapy appointments on Tuesdays. The slow, grinding documentation of everything the disease was taking from him. His handwriting first, then his ability to drive, then the steadiness in his hands that had once built a bookshelf for my childhood bedroom that still stood in the corner of his living room. My brother called every couple of weeks. My sister texted more often, but her messages were about her kids, mostly updates that assumed I had the bandwidth to receive them. When I told her once that Dad had fallen in the bathroom and I'd had to call an ambulance at midnight, she responded with a sad face emoji and then sent me a video of her daughter's first haircut. I am not telling you this so you'll hate them. I'm telling you because you need to understand what it costs a person to live inside a situation like that for 4 years and still keep believing that when it really mattered, family would be family. My dad passed on a Tuesday in February. It was quiet, which I'm grateful for. He had been declining faster in the last few months, and the hospice nurse had warned me it could happen any day. I had been sleeping on the couch near his room because I was afraid of missing it, afraid he'd go alone in the dark. He didn't. I was holding his hand. I called my brother first. He said he would try to get a flight. He called back an hour later to say that the cost was prohibitive on such short notice and they would drive, but they couldn't leave until Thursday because of a work thing he couldn't reschedule. My sister booked a flight but changed it twice because of the kids' school schedule and ended up arriving the day before the funeral. My aunt and 2 cousins came from 2 hours away. I arranged everything. The funeral home, the obituary, The flowers, the catering for the small reception afterward. I went through my father's files to find the paperwork he had organized years ago in a folder labeled "in case." I called his friends. I handled the bank. I did all of it in the 4 days between his death and his service on almost no sleep, while my brother and sister stayed in the house and asked me questions about where things were and what time they needed to be ready. My sister cried a lot, which I don't say critically. Grief doesn't have a right or wrong shape. But it meant that she needed tending to, and somehow I became the one who did that too. Rubbing her back in the kitchen, reassuring her that we'd done everything we could for him. My brother spent a lot of time on his phone. The funeral was on a Saturday. About 60 people came, which felt like a lot for a man who had lived quietly. His old co-workers from the mill. His neighbor Frank, who used to play cards with him on Friday nights. A few people from his church. They told me things about my father I hadn't known. That he had quietly paid for a younger co-worker's car repair when the man's family was going through a hard stretch. That he had driven an elderly woman from his church to chemotherapy for almost a year without telling anyone. I stood at the reception and smiled and accepted condolences and said, "Thank you. He was a wonderful man, probably 40 times. I meant it every single time." After everyone left, I cleaned up. My brother said they were tired and took the kids to the motel they were staying at. My sister went to lie down in the guest room. I washed dishes and folded the borrowed tablecloths and took out 3 bags of trash and then changed out of that borrowed dress and sat in my dad's armchair and did not cry. I was too tired to cry. That was when I sent the message to the group chat. "Dad's service is over. I'm exhausted. Can someone come stay with me tonight?" You already know what they said. What came next is the part I need to explain carefully because it involves my father's will, and I know how that sounds. I am not a person who expected to inherit anything. I had not moved in with my father for money or property. I want to be clear about that before I continue. My father had a small life insurance policy and the house. The house was worth about $240,000, which is not nothing in Clover Hill. He had updated his will 3 years before he died, and a copy was in the in-case folder. I had never read it. It wasn't my business until it was. His attorney, a man named Mr. Taft, who had an office above the pharmacy on Main Street, called me the week after the funeral to schedule a time to go over the estate. I asked if my brother and sister should be there. He said that was up to me. I told them. My brother flew back to Phoenix 2 days after the service. My sister left the same day he did. When I texted them about the attorney meeting, my brother said he'd handle it remotely and asked me to let him know what was in the will. My sister said she trusted me to report back accurately. I went to the meeting alone. My father had left the house to me. His reasoning was documented in a letter attached to the will. He had seen what I gave up, he wrote. He wanted to make sure I had something solid under my feet. The life insurance was to be split 3 ways equally among his children. It was not a complicated estate. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a weight in my chest that I couldn't name. I drove home, walked into my father's house, my house now, technically, though it didn't feel that way yet, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I called my brother that evening and told him the contents of the will. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I counted to 8. "So he left you the house," he said finally. "Yes. And you're just telling me this now? I literally just found out 2 hours ago." What followed was not a conversation I want to reconstruct, word for word, but the short version is that my brother did not believe the will was fair. He felt that Dad had made the decision under my influence. He used that phrase twice. Under your influence. As though 4 years of showing up for someone was a form of manipulation rather than love. He said he was going to talk to his own attorney. He said my sister felt the same way, which she confirmed in a text message that came through while I was still on the phone with him. "We both think this needs to be looked at more carefully. It doesn't seem right." I held the phone after the call ended and looked around the kitchen where I had cooked my father's meals for 4 years. The medication organizer was still on the counter. His coffee mug was still in the drying rack. His reading glasses were folded on the windowsill above the sink where he always left them. I typed, "I understand. Let me know what you decide." I hit send. Then I went to bed. Over the next 3 weeks, my brother retained an attorney and began the process of contesting the will on the grounds that our father had lacked capacity and that I had exerted undue influence. I received formal legal correspondence. I had to hire my own attorney, which cost me money I did not have, because the only money I'd had for 4 years had gone toward my father's care and the shortfall between what insurance covered and what it didn't. My sister didn't contest the will formally, but she stopped talking to me. No calls, no texts, nothing. The silence was its own kind of statement. I kept going to work. I kept waking up in the house on Clover Hill. I kept cleaning out my father's belongings slowly, the way grief requires you to. One drawer at a time, one afternoon at a time, setting aside the flannel shirts and the fishing lures and the decades of accumulated small things that meant nothing to anyone but everything to me. I kept talking to him in the empty rooms the way you do when someone is gone, but not gone enough yet. I am not going to pretend I was holding it together well. I wasn't. About 6 weeks after the funeral, I had a day so bad I couldn't work. I sat in front of my laptop and couldn't make my hands move. A friend from my transcription network, a woman named Bev who I'd only ever talked to online, happened to check in that afternoon, and I told her more than I meant to. She listened for a long time. She said, "You need to tell someone who can actually show up." I said there wasn't anyone like that. She said, "Then let's figure out who's close to you." What I hadn't realized was that I had neighbors who had watched my father's decline from a quiet distance for years and understood more than I thought. Frank, who had played cards with my dad on Friday nights, knocked on my door 2 days after I talked to Bev. He said he'd heard I was going through it, that word traveled in Clover Hill, and that his wife Ruth Ann had made a pot of soup and was wondering if I ate soup. I said I did. He brought it over in a pot with a dish towel wrapped around the handle and stayed for an hour on the porch and told me stories about my father I had never heard. Other neighbors started checking in. A woman from my dad's church, Mona, brought groceries. A man named Terrell, who lived at the end of the street and had known my father since they were both young, came by one afternoon to fix a section of fence he said had been bothering him all winter. I didn't ask him to. He just appeared with tools. These people had no obligation to me. They came anyway. Meanwhile, my brother's attorney sent another letter, then another. The legal process moved slowly, the way legal processes do, but it occupied a part of my brain constantly, this low hum of threat underneath everything else. I don't know exactly how the story got out. Small towns breed information the way people breathe air, and I suspect it was a combination of things. Frank mentioning something to someone, the courthouse records being public, the attorney's office being 2 floors above a pharmacy where everyone in Clover Hill went eventually. However it spread. The local paper ran a small item. Legal dispute follows death of longtime Clover Hill resident. It was careful and factual and didn't name me directly, but anyone in town who read it knew who it was about. The reporter, a young woman named Carla who had gone to my high school, called me and asked if I wanted to share my perspective. I said no. She ran the item anyway, citing public records. A woman in town started a GoFundMe to help cover my legal fees. I didn't ask for it. I found out about it when 3 people texted me the link on the same afternoon. Within 2 weeks, it had raised $11,000. I stared at the number on my phone screen and cried for the first time since my father died. My brother saw the GoFundMe. He called me, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before. Not quite remorse, but something adjacent to it. Something that sounded like a man realizing he was visible. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "People are going to think we're monsters." I said, "What would you like me to do about it?" He didn't have an answer for that. My sister called 2 days later. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she knew I had given up a lot to take care of Dad. She said it in a tone that suggested she was waiting for me to tell her it was fine, that no one was to blame, that we could all move forward. I recognized the cadence. I had performed it myself for most of my life, that particular dance where the person who has been hurt becomes responsible for making the person who hurt them comfortable. I didn't do it this time. I said, "I know you've been thinking. I've been thinking too. I think we both know what the right thing is here." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I told him we should drop it." Then tell him again, I said. And mean it this time. My brother dropped the contest 6 weeks later. His attorney sent a letter that used a lot of formal language to say essentially nothing meaningful about why. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was over. The day I got that letter, I sat on the back porch of my father's house in the early spring cold and looked at his garden, which had gone untended since October. The raised beds he had built the summer before he got too sick to manage them were still there, solid and square, because he had built things to last. The soil was dark and soft from winter. In a few weeks, it would be time to plant. My father had grown tomatoes every year for as long as I could remember. He would give them away to anyone who would take them. Neighbors, co-workers, the woman at the grocery store checkout who once mentioned she liked tomatoes. He didn't do it for credit. He just liked growing things and giving them away. I thought about that for a long time on the porch. I went back inside and emailed my attorney to confirm the contest was withdrawn. Then I texted my sister. I'd like to talk when you're ready. Not about the legal stuff. Just to talk. She didn't respond for 3 days. When she did, she said, okay. That was it. Okay. But it was something. My brother has not reached out. I have not reached out to him. I don't know what that relationship becomes from here. Or if it becomes anything. Some wounds need time that you can't schedule, and some things break in ways that don't repair the way they were before. I've made my peace with not knowing yet. What I do know is this. The week after the contest was dropped, Frank and Ruthann and Mona and Terrell and a few other neighbors came over on a Saturday morning with seeds and gardening gloves and helped me turn over the soil in my father's raised beds. We worked for most of the afternoon. Someone brought a thermos of coffee. Someone else brought a radio and set it on the porch. We planted tomatoes. At some point, Mona looked over at me and said, "Your daddy would have liked this." And I said, "I know he would," and I meant it down to somewhere past words. I have been in this house for almost a year now. I have learned things I didn't know I needed to learn. How to manage a property. How to file paperwork I'd never encountered. How to ask for help without apologizing for needing it. I am still freelancing. Still on the same street where I grew up. Still living a life that doesn't look like what I thought 32 would look like. But it's mine. Really mine. In a way I didn't understand before. There's a thing that happens when you show up for someone, year after year. Thanklessly and without audience. You start to doubt your own value. You start to absorb the logic of the people around you, the ones who treat your presence as given and your absence as unthinkable, and you begin to believe them. You begin to believe that your effort is just what you owe, that the showing up doesn't count because someone had to do it and it happened to be you. My father knew it wasn't just what I owed. He wrote it down in a letter and attached it to his will and trusted a man named Mr. Taft above a pharmacy on Main Street to deliver it. I have read that letter so many times the paper is soft at the folds. He called me steady. He said the word steady. He said, "You were steady for me when I couldn't be steady for myself, and I want you to have solid ground to stand on." I think about steadiness a lot now. About what it means to be the person who stays and what it costs, and what it's worth, and how the worth and the cost don't always come from the places you expect. If you are the one who stays, the one who shows up, who makes the calls, who figures out the paperwork, who cleans up after the last guest leaves, I want you to know that I see you. I know what that life feels like from the inside. I know the specific loneliness of being necessary to people who don't notice you, and I know what it means to finally be held by the unexpected ones. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when you stop pretending, stop smoothing things over, stop typing no worries when you have every worry in the world. It's a story about what grows in the space you clear when you finally stop filling it with other people's comfort. Whatever you're carrying right now, whatever group chat left you on read when you needed someone most, please know this. The people who show up for you exist. Sometimes they live across the street and bring soup in a pot wrapped in a dish towel. Sometimes they're strangers on the internet who ask if you eat soup. Sometimes they're the ones you haven't met yet. Your steadiness has value. Don't let anyone spend it without knowing what it's worth. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one who stayed? Have you ever had a stranger show up when the people closest to you couldn't? I read every single comment, and I'll be in there with you. I've been thinking a lot lately about cause and effect, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind. The kind that accumulates in ordinary moments over years until one day, the weight of it becomes undeniable. My brother didn't wake up one morning and decide to be cruel. My sister didn't choose indifference the way you choose a coat. They became who they were through 1,000 small decisions to look away, to stay comfortable, to let someone else handle the hard thing. And I became who I was through the opposite. 1,000 small decisions to stay, to show up, to be the one who didn't leave. Neither of us was dramatic about it. We were just consistent. And consistency, I've learned, is the most honest thing about a person. You can say anything. What you do every single day is what you actually believe. What happened after my father died was not luck, and it was not punishment. It was consequence. Frank knocked on my door because he had watched me for 4 years and knew what kind of person I was. Mona brought groceries because people who pay attention know when someone is drowning, even when that person insists they're fine. Terrell fixed my fence because decency recognizes decency. They showed up for me because I had, without knowing it, built something through all those years of quiet showing up. A kind of credibility that has nothing to do with money or status and everything to do with character. My brother's attorney letters were also consequence. Not cosmic punishment. Not the universe balancing its scales in some mystical way. Just a man who had spent years choosing himself, reaching, predictably, for more. It was entirely consistent with who he had been. I couldn't even be surprised by it once I stopped being hurt enough to see clearly. The thing I want to say about resilience is that it isn't about being strong all the time. I was not strong. I cried on the phone to a woman I had never met in person. I sat in my father's armchair after everyone left and felt something so hollow, I didn't have a word for it. Resilience isn't the absence of falling apart. It's the decision, made again and again, to be honest about what you need and to stay open to receiving it from wherever it comes. That's it. That's the whole thing. It sounds small, but it is the hardest work I have ever done. What I understand now that I didn't understand at 30 is that the life you build is mostly made of who you choose to be when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. My father knew that. He wrote it down. He called me steady, and I carry that word with me the way you carry something small and solid in your pocket, something you reach for when you need to remember what's real. If you've been the one who stayed, who showed up, who typed no worries when every single thing was a worry, I want you to know that your consistency is building something. You may not see it yet, but somewhere, someone is watching. And one day, they're going to show up at your door with soup in a pot and a dish towel wrapped around the handle, and you are going to understand that nothing you gave was wasted.